The morning fog covered streets and parks, and the hospital seemed ready for another ordinary day. A German shepherd appeared alone at the gates, carrying an unconscious man on its back. The impact was immediate. He was severely weakened, the result of a mysterious disappearance. The dog's loyalty defied human limits, every step vital to saving that life. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you are watching us from. We continue. Manchester dawned with a fine mist that coated streets and parks, spreading a light chill through the city centre and around the green spaces. The Royal Albion Hospital was preparing for another ordinary day of services, with nurses adjusting monitors, doctors checking schedules, and patients awaiting routine appointments. Louisa Fletcher walked through the corridors of the emergency department with the calm of someone who knew every detail of the place. It had been 6 years of dedication to the hospital, 6 years of night shifts, sleepless dawns, and lives saved. She was adjusting the ID badge on her navy blue scrubs when she heard the first murmur coming from the reception. Something different was happening. The hospital security guards were talking in low tones, pointing towards the service gates. Louisa frowned and approached, noticing that small groups of employees were beginning to gather near the side entrance. There was an unusual commotion for a Tuesday morning, a strange energy that cut through the chilly Manchester air. When she finally managed to see what was causing so much commotion, Louisa felt her heart race. A German shepherd of impressive size emerged through the gates, dragging itself with difficulty. Its fur was dirty, stained with mud and dry leaves. The animal's body showed clear signs of extreme exhaustion, each step seeming to demand a colossal effort. But what truly shocked Louisa was what the dog was carrying on its back. An apparently unconscious man lay there, fragile, wrapped in wet and torn clothes. The fabric was dirty and stained, and the man's face, pale and marked by light scratches, hung to the side. Silence fell over the hospital. Only the cautious steps of the animal echoed in the courtyard. The German shepherd advanced with calculated determination, ignoring the surprised and confused looks around it. It did not hesitate, did not bark for attention. Its brown eyes remained fixed ahead, as if it knew exactly where it needed to go. Every movement was precise, every step demonstrated intelligence and purpose. Louisa felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't just compassion for the exhausted animal or the unconscious man, it was something deeper, a feeling that she was witnessing something extraordinary. She took a step forward, but one of the security guards held her by the arm. "The dog could be dangerous," the man said in a low voice. "Better wait for the veterinary team." Louisa observed the animal more closely. There was no aggression in its movements, only protection. The German shepherd didn't growl when other employees approached. It simply positioned itself strategically, blocking any attempt to remove the man from its back. Its muscles trembled visibly, a sign of extreme and prolonged effort. Its paws were injured, with superficial cuts indicating a long walk over difficult terrain. "He's not dangerous," Louisa murmured, gently freeing herself from the guard's grip. "He's being protective." She advanced slowly, keeping her hands visible and her movements gentle. The German shepherd watched her attentively, but did not retreat. Louisa could see the intelligence shining in those tired eyes. The animal was evaluating everyone around, deciding who it could trust. When Louisa crouched at a safe distance, the dog tilted its head slightly, as if considering her approach. "It's okay," Louisa said in a low, reassuring voice. "We're going to help you both. You did an incredible job bringing him here." As if understanding the words, the German shepherd minimally relaxed its tense muscles. Louisa took the opportunity to get a better look at the unconscious man. Even with his face marked by scratches and extreme pallor, there was something familiar in his features. She leaned in a little closer, trying to identify him, when one of the on-duty doctors approached quickly. Dr. Henry Matthews, an experienced cardiologist and coordinator of the emergency department, brought 2 nurses and a stretcher with him. He studied the scene for a few seconds before addressing Louisa. "Can you establish contact with the animal?" Louisa nodded. "I think so. He's too exhausted to react aggressively. He's just protecting the man." Henry approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance from the German shepherd. "We need to remove the patient immediately. His vital signs I need to be checked urgently." The dog, however, did not allow the nurses to get close. Every attempt to touch the unconscious man was blocked by the animal, which repositioned itself strategically, always keeping its body between the strangers and its charge. Frustration was beginning to grow among the medical team when Louisa had an idea. "Leave it to me," she said, standing up slowly. "I'll try to gain his trust." Louisa extended her open hand towards the German Shepherd, allowing the animal to sniff her skin. The dog smelled it carefully, studying her. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, the animal gently licked the palm of her hand. It was a sign of acceptance, a gesture of minimal but crucial trust. "You're very special, aren't you?" Louisa murmured, allowing herself to lightly touch the animal's head. "You came from very far away. It must have been a terrible journey." The German Shepherd closed its eyes for a brief moment, as if finally allowing itself to feel the weight of exhaustion. But it quickly opened them again, remaining alert. Louisa used the established connection to position herself beside the unconscious man, gently touching his wrist. The skin was cold, but the pulse was perceptible, though weak and irregular. "He's alive," Louisa announced, feeling an unexpected relief. "But he needs immediate care." With slow, deliberate movements, Louisa began to help the medical team transfer the man to the stretcher. The German Shepherd watched every move with extreme attention, but did not interfere. It was as if it recognized that these people were there to help. When they finally managed to position the man on the stretcher, the dog took a few shaky steps before collapsing to the ground, completely exhausted. "Quick, call the vet," Henry ordered. "This animal needs urgent care too." As the medical team rushed with the stretcher towards the emergency department, Louisa remained by the German Shepherd's side. She gently stroked the dirty, damp fur, feeling the animal's body tremble with exhaustion. Tears welled up in her eyes without her realizing it. There was something deeply moving about the scene, something that touched a vulnerable part of her soul. "You're a hero," she whispered. "A true hero." The hospital's veterinarian, Dr. Marina Cole, arrived quickly with her team. Marina was a middle-aged woman with graying hair tied in a bun and kind eyes that seemed to understand the pain of any creature. She knelt beside the German Shepherd, examining it with experienced hands. Extreme exhaustion, injuries to the paws, possible severe dehydration, Marina listed as she worked. But nothing life-threatening. "This animal is extraordinarily strong and resilient." Louisa watched as Marina and her team began the initial care. The German Shepherd accepted the treatment with surprising docility, as if finally allowing itself to rest. But its eyes remained attentive, constantly turning towards the emergency department where the man had been taken. "He won't rest completely until he knows the man is okay," Louisa commented. Marina nodded, acknowledging the animal's evident loyalty. "I'll do my best to stabilize him quickly. Then we can take him near the patient, if that helps in the recovery of both." Louisa thanked her and ran back to the emergency department. When she arrived, the medical team had already started the standard procedures. The man was connected to monitors, receiving an intravenous drip and undergoing preliminary tests. Henry worked with the efficiency of someone who had dedicated decades to medicine, but there was an unusual tension in his movements. "Louisa, I need you to check his identity," Henry said without taking his eyes off the patient. "There's something familiar about this face." Louisa approached, carefully cleaning the man's face with a damp gauze. As she removed the dirt and dried blood from the scratches, his features became clearer. She felt her stomach churn when she finally recognized him. That face had been plastered across newspapers, magazines, and television programs for weeks. "Doctor," she whispered, her voice trembling, "it's Caleb Ashworth, the businessman who disappeared 5 days ago." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Everyone present knew the name. Caleb Ashworth was one of the most influential businessmen in the north of England, recognized not only for his successful investments in technology and infrastructure, but also for his philanthropic projects. His mysterious disappearance had dominated the headlines, generating a wide range of speculation and theories. Henry approached, observing the patient's face with renewed attention. "It is him," he confirmed. "We need to notify the authorities immediately and double the security. This case will attract national attention. As the team mobilized for the necessary procedures, Louisa remained by Caleb's side, monitoring his vital signs. She studied the businessman's face, noticing details that public photographs didn't show. There was a vulnerability in his features that contrasted with the image of power and control the media always portrayed. His dark brown hair was dirty and disheveled. The stubble on his chin indicated days without basic care, and the marks on his wrists suggested he had been restrained in some way. Louisa felt a wave of compassion. It didn't matter who he was or how much money he had. At that moment, he was just a fragile man, dependent on the help of others to survive. And he had been saved by an extraordinary animal that, against all odds, had managed to bring him there. While she worked, Louisa noticed something caught on Caleb's torn clothing. It was a small piece of fabric, as if it had been ripped from something larger. She carefully removed it and handed it to Henry, who examined it briefly before placing it in a sterile envelope. Every detail could be important in understanding what had happened. The preliminary tests began to yield results. Caleb showed signs of severe dehydration, restraint marks on his wrists and ankles, and traces of sedatives in his blood. The toxicology report would be more precise in the coming hours, but it was already evident that he had been kept under some kind of medication to remain unconscious or docile. This wasn't an accident, Henry murmured, studying the results. It was something planned and executed with precision. Louisa felt a shiver run down her spine. The implication was clear. Caleb Ashworth had been kidnapped and held captive, and somehow he had managed to escape or be rescued by the German shepherd. But how? And why? The questions piled up in her mind, each more intriguing than the last. That's when she noticed something that had almost gone unnoticed. On the German shepherd's collar, which had been temporarily removed by the veterinary team for treatment, there was a small torn note. Louisa picked up the collar carefully, unrolling the damp, stained paper. The handwritten coordinates pointed to a specific spot outside the city, in the forested areas surrounding Manchester. "Dr. Matthews," she said, holding out the paper, "I think this might be important." Henry studied the coordinates, then called one of the hospital's security guards. "These coordinates need to be passed on to the authorities immediately. They might indicate where Caleb was held captive." As the information was relayed, Louisa turned her attention back to the patient. Caleb remained unconscious, but his vital signs were gradually stabilizing. The intravenous medication was taking effect, rehydrating his body and restoring essential electrolytes. It was a matter of time before he woke up, and when he did, the answers would begin to emerge. Louisa took a moment of relative calm to check on the German shepherd. Marina had managed to stabilize him, and the animal was now resting on an improvised veterinary stretcher in the hallway near the emergency room. Even exhausted and injured, the dog kept its eyes open, watching the movement around it. "How is he?" Louisa asked, gently stroking the animal's head. Marina smiled. "Strong as an ox. The wounds on his paws are being treated, and the dehydration is being corrected. In a few hours, he'll be much better. But he needs complete rest." "He won't rest until he sees that the man is okay," Louisa observed. Marina agreed. "That's why I suggested to Dr. Matthews that, as soon as possible, we allow the animal to be near the patient. The bond between them is evident and might even aid in both of their recoveries." Louisa stayed for a few minutes beside the German shepherd, observing it with growing admiration. What kind of animal would travel for miles carrying an adult man? What kind of loyalty was this, capable of overcoming physical exhaustion and self-preservation instincts? There was something profound and moving in this story, something that touched the hearts of all who witnessed it. When she returned to the emergency room, Louisa found Henry talking to two investigators who had arrived quickly after being notified. They were asking questions about Caleb's condition, the circumstances of his arrival, and the evidence found. Louisa provided all the information she had, including the note with the coordinates and the German shepherd's protective behavior. "This dog could be the key to understanding what happened," said one of the investigators, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes. "Animals trained for search and rescue have exceptional intelligence. If he managed to bring the businessman here, he may have come from a specific location we need to identify. The coordinates are being verified now, informed the other investigator, younger and visibly impressed with the story. Teams are being mobilized to investigate the indicated area. While the authorities worked, Louisa remained focused on Caleb. She monitored every change in his vital signs, every small movement that might indicate he was returning to consciousness. There was something intriguing about caring for this man. She knew him only from the news, from reports that highlighted his business successes and philanthropic initiatives. But here, in this emergency room, he was just a vulnerable human being, dependent on care and compassion. The hours passed slowly. The hospital, which had initially been buzzing with the news of Caleb Ashworth's arrival, gradually returned to its routine. But in the emergency department, the tension remained. Everyone knew that when Caleb woke up, an extraordinary story would be revealed. A story of survival, loyalty, and mystery that was already capturing the attention of the entire city. Louisa took a break to have coffee and organize her thoughts. She sat in the small hospital break room, holding the steaming mug between her hands, when a colleague approached. Camilla, another nurse on shift, had curious eyes and a worried expression. "Is it true you were the first one to make contact with the dog?" Camilla asked, sitting down beside her. Louisa nodded. "He was so exhausted, but he wouldn't let anyone near the businessman. It was as if he knew he had to protect him until the very last moment. I heard there are restraint marks on his body, that it really was a kidnapping." Louisa hesitated before answering. "It seems so, but we don't know all the details yet. We need to wait for him to wake up and tell us what happened." Camilla sighed. "This story is going to be national news. You'll be interviewed by all the papers." Louisa hadn't thought about that. The idea of public exposure made her uncomfortable. She was a private person who preferred to work behind the scenes, caring for patients without seeking recognition. But she understood that this story transcended her personal preference. It was something extraordinary that deserved to be shared. When she returned to the emergency room, Louisa noticed a subtle change. Caleb was beginning to show signs that he would soon regain consciousness. His eyes moved rapidly under his closed eyelids, indicating increased brain activity. His fingers twitched occasionally, and small sounds escaped his lips. Henry approached, checking the monitors. "He's coming around. Be prepared for possible reactions. People who have been through traumatic situations can wake up disoriented or agitated." Louisa positioned herself strategically beside the stretcher, ready to calm Caleb if necessary. She watched as his eyelids began to flutter, as his facial muscles twitched, as his eyes finally opened slowly. For a moment, Caleb seemed completely lost, his light brown eyes wandering unfocused around the room. Then, gradually, consciousness returned, and with it, panic. "Where am I?" His voice came out hoarse and weak, laden with fear. "Where's Thor? Where's my dog?" "It's okay," Louisa said immediately, using the most reassuring tone possible. "You're at the Royal Albion Hospital in Manchester. You're safe, and Thor is here too, being cared for by our veterinary team." The mention of the dog's name seemed to calm Caleb minimally. He tried to sit up, but his weak body didn't respond to his commands. The frustration was visible on his face. "I need to see him," Caleb murmured, his voice breaking. "He saved me. I need to know he's okay." Henry approached, introducing himself as the doctor in charge. "Mr. Ashworth, you've been through a terrible ordeal. Your body needs time to recover. Thor is being very well cared for, and you'll be able to see him soon. But first I need you to tell me how you're feeling." Caleb closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "Tired, very tired, and confused. How did I get here?" "Thor brought you," Louisa answered gently. "He walked to the hospital carrying you on his back. It was something extraordinary." Tears began to stream from Caleb's eyes. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was an intense emotional release, built up over days of hardship. Louisa felt her heart ache and instinctively held his hand. "You're safe now," she repeated. "Everything is going to be okay." Caleb squeezed Louisa's hand as if it were an anchor in the storm of emotions that overwhelmed him. When he finally managed to calm down, he opened his eyes again and looked directly at her. There was gratitude in that look, but also a deep vulnerability. "I don't know how to thank you," he murmured. "You and Thor saved my life." "Thor did the heavy lifting," Louisa replied with a gentle smile. "We just continued what he started." Henry intervened, starting to ask necessary medical questions. Caleb answered as best he could, describing symptoms of nausea, muscle pain, and a mental fog that was gradually clearing. The toxicology report would be crucial to understanding exactly what substances had been administered to him. "The authorities will want to speak with you as soon as you feel up to it," Henry informed him. "But there's no rush. Your recovery is the priority." Caleb nodded, but there was a tension in his face that didn't go unnoticed. Louisa realized he was processing difficult memories, reliving traumatic moments he wasn't yet ready to share. She decided to change the focus of the conversation. "Thor is resting in the hallway next door," she said. "He has injuries on his paws and was very dehydrated. But he's going to make a full recovery. He hasn't stopped watching the door to this room since he arrived." Caleb smiled for the first time, a weak but genuine smile. "He's special. Always has been. But I never imagined he would be capable of something like this." "You have a history together?" Louisa asked, realizing that talking about the dog helped Caleb relax. "We do," he replied, his eyes gaining a distant gleam. "Thor was part of a search and rescue unit my company supported a few years ago. When he retired from service, I decided to adopt him. It was the best decision I ever made." Louisa listened attentively as Caleb shared fragments of the story. Thor had been an exceptional working dog, trained to locate people in disaster situations. His intelligence and determination were legendary among trainers. When an old injury forced him into early retirement, Caleb didn't hesitate to offer him a home. For the past 3 years, Thor had been his constant companion, present on business trips and during leisure time. "But I never needed him like this," Caleb concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined that one day he would literally have to save me." The conversation was interrupted when Marina entered the room, carefully pushing the stretcher where Thor was resting. The German Shepherd's paws were bandaged, and an intravenous catheter was still connected, but his eyes shone with renewed life. When he saw Caleb, the animal immediately tried to get up. "Easy, Thor," Marina said firmly but gently. "You still need to rest." But Thor wouldn't calm down. His gaze fixed on Caleb conveyed urgency and concern. Marina, realizing that the separation was causing more stress than help, decided to position the veterinary stretcher next to Caleb's. "I think you two will recover better together," she commented with a smile. Caleb reached out his hand, touching Thor's head. The dog closed its eyes, finally relaxing under the familiar touch. It was a moving scene that made Louisa hold back tears. The bond between these two beings transcended words or rational explanations. It was pure loyalty, gratitude, and unconditional love. "Thank you, my friend," Caleb whispered. "You brought me back. I'll never forget this." Thor gently licked Caleb's hand, a simple gesture laden with meaning. Then he finally allowed himself to rest, knowing his mission was accomplished and his human was safe. Louisa watched the scene with a heavy heart. There was something profoundly beautiful in that connection, something that reminded everyone present of the capacity for love and sacrifice that transcends species. In that moment, the differences between human and animal seemed insignificant in the face of such a demonstration of absolute loyalty. The following hours passed in relative tranquility. Caleb alternated between moments of consciousness and periods of light sleep, his body fighting to recover from the ordeal. Thor remained by his side, vigilant even in rest. Louisa continued her shift, but found herself constantly checking on these two special patients. As night began to fall over Manchester, bringing with it a more intense cold, the first news stories began to leak to the press. Reporters started gathering outside the hospital, cameras and microphones at the ready, eager for details about the miraculous rescue of Caleb Ashworth. The hospital administration had to reinforce security, ensuring the patient's privacy was maintained. Louisa watched the activity through the window, feeling a mix of apprehension and admiration. This story was truly capturing everyone's imagination. It was more than just the rescue of a wealthy businessman. It was a narrative of survival, loyalty, and the extraordinary ability of animals to show unconditional love. When her shift finally ended in the early hours of the next morning, Louisa felt strangely reluctant to leave. She passed by the room where Caleb and Thor were resting, watching them for a moment. Both were sleeping now side by side, two survivors of an ordeal that had not yet been fully revealed. Louisa knew this was just the beginning. The investigations would bring answers, revelations would emerge, and the full story of what had happened to Caleb Ashworth would finally be told. And somehow, she felt that she was destined to be a part of this journey, forever connected to these two extraordinary beings by the chance of a misty dawn in Manchester. The first rays of the next morning's sun penetrated the windows of the Royal Albion Hospital as Louisa returned for her shift. She had only slept for a few hours, but her sleep had been restless, filled with images of Thor carrying Caleb through dark forests and dangerous paths. As she walked through the familiar hospital corridors, she felt a different kind of anxiety growing in her chest. It wasn't just professional concern. There was something more personal, an inexplicable connection to this case that intrigued and at the same time frightened her. When she arrived at the room where Caleb and Thor had spent the night, she found a comforting scene. Both were awake. Caleb was sitting up on the stretcher, his torso supported by pillows, his eyes still tired but more alert than the day before. Thor was lying beside the stretcher, his head resting on his bandaged paws, watching his human's every move with protective attention. The presence of Marina, the veterinarian, completed the picture. "Good morning," Louisa said, entering the room, with a genuine smile. "How was your night?" Caleb returned the smile, but there was a shadow of fatigue on his face. "Better than I imagined. Having Thor nearby makes all the difference." Marina stood up from the chair where she was sitting, adjusting her glasses. "You both had a quiet night. Your vital signs are stabilizing well. Thor is recovering quickly from the wounds on his paws. He's an exceptionally resilient animal." Louisa approached to check Caleb's monitors, noticing that all parameters showed significant improvement. His hydration was normalized, blood pressure stabilized, and the effects of the sedatives were gradually diminishing. It was remarkable progress considering the critical condition he had arrived in. "Dr. Matthews will be here for a full assessment soon," Louisa informed him, "and the authorities are waiting to speak with you whenever you feel ready." Caleb nodded, but a visible tension took hold of his shoulders. "I know. I have to tell them everything. But it's hard to organize my memories. Some parts feel hazy, as if I'm seeing everything through frosted glass." "Those are the effects of the sedatives," Louisa explained gently. "They can temporarily affect your memory, but as your body eliminates the substances, your recollections should become clearer." Marina said her goodbyes, promising to return later to check on Thor. When she left, Louisa felt the atmosphere in the room subtly change. Caleb was watching her with an intensity that made a warmth rise to her face. "You were the first person to make contact with Thor yesterday," he said. "He wouldn't let anyone get close, but he trusted you immediately. That says a lot about who you are." Louisa felt flustered by the compliment. "I was just doing my job. Thor needed help and I was there." "No," Caleb insisted, his voice soft but firm. "It was more than that. Animals like Thor have an infallible instinct for recognizing genuine people. He saw something in you that made him trust you. And I see it too." The comment left Louisa speechless. She averted her gaze, pretending to adjust Caleb's pillows to hide the blush she felt on her cheeks. There was something in the way he looked at her, a vulnerability mixed with gratitude that affected her in an unexpected way. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Matthews, accompanied by two investigators. One of them was the same, middle-aged man who had been present the day before, now formally introducing himself as Detective Robert Foster. The other was a young woman with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor who identified herself as investigator Helena Morris. "Mr. Ashworth," Robert began, his voice respectful but direct, "we understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but we need your information to move forward with the investigation. Do you feel up to talking with us?" Caleb took a deep breath, glancing briefly at Thor as if drawing strength. "I am. I'll tell you everything I can remember." Louisa prepared to leave, to give them privacy for the questioning, but Caleb held her hand. "Please stay. Your presence helps me stay calm." She hesitated, looking to the investigators for confirmation. Helena nodded. "If Mr. Ashworth feels more comfortable that way, there's no problem." Louisa sat in a nearby chair, still holding Caleb's hand. The touch was comforting for both of them, a silent connection that conveyed support and understanding. Caleb began his account slowly. "It all started 6 days ago. I was at my house, a property on the outskirts of Manchester, working in my office. Thor was with me, as always. It was night around 10 o'clock when I heard a strange noise coming from the back of the house." "What did you do?" asked Helena, taking careful notes. "I went to check. I thought it might be a wild animal. The property is in a relatively isolated area, surrounded by native woodland. When I got to the back porch, I saw a figure moving among the trees. Before I could react, I felt something pressed against my face. A cloth, I think. It had a strong chemical smell. After that, everything went dark." Robert leaned forward. "You didn't see the person's face?" "No, it was dark and it all happened so fast. I vaguely remember hearing Thor barking furiously, trying to protect me. Then, nothing. The next moment of consciousness I have is waking up in a different place, cold and damp." "Can you describe this place?" Helena pressed. Caleb closed his eyes, forcing his memory. It was an old building, looked like an abandoned warehouse. There was dampness on the walls. The smell of mold was strong. The windows were covered with wooden planks. I was tied to a chair. The ropes on my wrists and ankles were tight. The light was dim, coming from an old bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Were you alone?" asked Robert. "Most of the time, yes, but periodically someone would come, always wearing a mask and gloves. They never spoke much, just gave me water and food sporadically, and gave me injections." "Injections?" Caleb nodded. "To keep me sedated, I imagine. Every time I refused or tried to resist, they would force me. I'd lose consciousness quickly after. I don't know how much time passed between one injection and the next. It all blurred into a confusing haze." Louisa squeezed his hand, feeling the tension grow in his fingers. She could imagine the terror he must have felt, the helplessness of being completely at the mercy of unknown kidnappers. "And Thor?" asked Helena. "How did he get to you?" Caleb's expression changed, a mix of surprise and admiration taking over his face. "That's the part I still can't fully understand. I was semi-conscious, fighting the effects of another injection. When I heard distant barking, I recognized it immediately. It was Thor. He had found me." "How was that possible?" Caleb shook his head. "I don't know. But Thor has always been exceptional. When he was a search and rescue dog, his tracking ability was legendary. He could follow scents that other dogs lost. He must have used that skill to find me, even from miles away." "And the kidnappers?" Robert was clearly intrigued. "Were they there when Thor arrived?" "I think so. I vaguely remember hearing shouting, the sound of a struggle. Thor must have driven them off. When I regained a bit more consciousness, I was being carried on Thor's back. He got me out of that place. I don't know how long we walked. I kept losing and regaining consciousness, but Thor never stopped. He knew where he needed to go." The silence that fell in the room was heavy with meaning. Everyone was processing the magnitude of what Caleb had described, a dog that tracked and rescued its kidnapped owner, facing unknown dangers and crossing long distances to bring him to safety. It was a story that defied logic and touched the heart deeply. "The coordinates we found on Thor's collar," said Helena. "Do you have any idea who might have put them there?" Caleb frowned, clearly confused. "Coordinates? I didn't know there was anything on his collar." Helena showed him the paper they had found. Caleb studied it carefully but shook his head. "I don't recognize these coordinates. And I don't know who could have put this there. Perhaps the kidnappers themselves, suggested Robert. It might have been intentional, or it could have been someone else who was at the location. The possibility of a third party being involved was intriguing and unsettling. Who else might be interested in helping Caleb? Or was it a trap, a way to divert the authorities' attention? Henry, who had remained silent throughout the questioning, intervened. I think that's enough for now. Caleb needs to continue resting. We can resume the conversation later when he's more recovered. The investigators agreed, but before leaving, Robert turned to Caleb. One last question, Mr. Ashworth. Do you have any suspicions about who might have done this? Enemies? People who would have reason to harm you? Caleb hesitated. The expression on his face revealed an internal conflict, as if he were debating with himself how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed. I have my businesses, my investments. Over the years, I've made some choices that may have displeased certain people, but nothing that would justify something like this. We'll need names, Helena insisted. Any lead could be crucial. I'll prepare a list, Caleb promised, but I need time to organize my thoughts. As I said, the memories are still fragmented. After the investigators left, the room became quiet again. Henry quickly checked Caleb's vitals, made a few notes in his chart and also left, leaving Louisa and Caleb alone once more. Thor remained vigilant, but now there was a relaxation in his posture that hadn't been there before. You didn't tell them everything, Louisa said softly. I could tell by your expression when they asked about possible enemies. Caleb looked at her, surprised by her sharp perception. You're very observant. It's part of my job. We learn to read people, their non-verbal cues. And you tensed up when they asked that question. Caleb was silent for a long moment, looking at his own hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, filled with a deep sadness. There are things in my past I'd rather not relive. Decisions I made, people I trusted who betrayed me. I built a business empire, but I paid a high price for it. Louisa waited patiently, knowing he needed to vent at his own pace. The connection that had formed between them was strange but undeniable. It was as if, in these few hours, they had established a trust that would normally take months to develop. 10 years ago, Caleb continued, I had a partner, Daniel Myers. We were friends since university, built our first business together. I trusted him like a brother. But I found out he was embezzling funds from the company, using our investments for risky personal projects. When I confronted him, he denied everything. It was a long and painful legal battle. I ended up proving the irregularities, and he lost everything. The last time I saw him 8 years ago, he swore he would make me pay for what I had done. Do you think he could be involved in this? Caleb shook his head slowly. I don't know. Daniel was ambitious and resentful, but I never imagined him capable of something so extreme. Besides, I heard he moved abroad after the trial. But maybe he came back. Maybe the hatred grew over the years. You need to tell the investigators this. I will. I just wanted to be sure before accusing someone without proof. I ruined Daniel's life once, even if it was justified. I don't want to do it again if he's innocent. The compassion evident in Caleb's words touched Louisa deeply. Despite everything he had been through, he still cared about being fair. It was a rare quality, especially in someone with so much power and resources. Is there anyone else? She asked gently. There always is. In the business world, you make enemies without even realizing it. Business decisions that affect lives, projects that are approved or rejected, partnerships that end. But no other name comes to mind with enough force to justify a planned kidnapping. The conversation was interrupted when Camilla, Louisa's colleague, entered the room with a tray carrying a light lunch for Caleb. She greeted them both with a professional smile, but her eyes revealed poorly concealed curiosity. The news about the case had spread throughout the hospital, and everyone wanted more details. After Camilla left, Caleb tried to eat, but barely managed a few spoonfuls of soup. His stomach was still fragile from the prolonged effects of sedation. Thor watched his every move, as if wanting to make sure his human was actually eating. Tell me about yourself, Caleb said suddenly. I know you're a nurse, that you've worked here for years, But who is Louisa Fletcher beyond the dedicated professional? The question caught Louisa off guard. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. There's not much to tell. I was born and raised here in Manchester. I always wanted to be a nurse. It's a calling that runs in the family. My mother was a nurse, my grandmother too. And your family? Are they close? Louisa felt a familiar pang in her chest. My mother passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. It was fast and devastating. My father lives in the countryside on a small farm. We talk regularly, but we don't see each other often. He preferred the quiet of rural life after we lost my mum. I'm so sorry, Caleb said sincerely. Losing someone like that must have been terrible. It was, but it also taught me to value every day, every moment with the people I love. It's part of why I'm so dedicated to my work. Every patient I help is a way of honoring her memory. Caleb watched her with renewed admiration. You're an extraordinary person, Louisa, not just for your professional care, but for your humanity. The words made Louisa feel a warmth spread through her chest. There was something in the way Caleb looked at her that made her feel seen, truly understood. It was a new, and at the same time, frightening sensation. The rest of the day passed in relative tranquility. Caleb alternated between periods of rest and moments of greater lucidity. Louisa stayed nearby whenever her other responsibilities allowed, finding herself increasingly drawn to his presence. They talked about various topics, from the changes in Manchester over the years to personal philosophies on life and purpose. As the afternoon wore on, Caleb began to recover more memories. Additional fragments of the kidnapping surfaced in his mind, details that had previously been obscured by the fog of sedatives. He remembered hearing voices occasionally, muffled arguments between the kidnappers. There were at least 2 people involved, maybe more, and something about a deadline, a date that had to be met. When he shared this information with the investigators during a second visit late in the afternoon, Robert and Helena were visibly interested. A deadline suggests the kidnapping had a specific goal, commented Helena. It wasn't just about keeping you captive. They wanted something from you. But they didn't ask for a ransom, Caleb observed, at least not that I heard. No one mentioned money or any other demand. Then what did they want? Robert was clearly intrigued. I don't know. Maybe they were waiting for the right moment, or maybe the goal was something else. There are many possibilities in the corporate world: insider information, trade secrets, access to accounts or systems. My disappearance alone could have affected the market, caused my company's stocks to fall. The analysis was cold but realistic. In the world of big business, a kidnapping could have multiple motives beyond a simple ransom. Helena took extensive notes, promising to investigate all possibilities. After the investigators left for the second time, Louisa noticed that Caleb was visibly tired. The prolonged conversations had drained his already limited energy. She adjusted his pillows, checked his medication, and insisted that he rest. You need to regain your strength, she said firmly. The answers will come in time. For now, the important thing is to take care of yourself. Caleb held her hand before she could move away. Thank you for being here, for everything. I don't know what I would do without you. The intensity in his eyes made Louisa's heart race. She was getting dangerously close to a line she shouldn't cross. He was her patient, someone under her professional care. But the connection between them transcended that defined role. There was something deeper developing, something that scared and attracted her simultaneously. I'll always be here when you need me, she replied softly, allowing herself to squeeze his hand for another moment before pulling away. As night fell over Manchester for the second time since the rescue, the hospital gradually quieted down. Louisa made her usual rounds, checking on other patients, but her thoughts kept returning to Caleb. She knew she was getting emotionally involved in a way that could complicate everything, but she couldn't help it. There was something about this man, in his vulnerability mixed with strength, his genuine gratitude and the way he treated Thor, that touched parts of her heart she had kept guarded for years. Around 11 o'clock, while Louisa was in the hospital break room having coffee, Camilla approached again. You're getting attached to him, she said bluntly. Everyone's noticed. Louisa sighed. I know. It wasn't my intention. He's a good man, Louisa. Anyone can see that. But he's also a millionaire businessman who lives in a completely different world from ours. When this story is over, when he's recovered, he'll go back to his life, and you'll go back to yours." Camilla's words were harsh but honest. Louisa knew her friend was right. Whatever was developing between her and Caleb was temporary, born of extraordinary circumstances. When reality set in, when he no longer needed constant care, the distance between their worlds would become apparent. "But what if it's not like that?" Louisa asked in a low voice. "What if it's something real?" Camilla touched her shoulder gently. "Then you'll have to figure that out when the time comes. I'm just asking you to be careful. I don't want to see you get hurt." Louisa appreciated the advice, knowing her friend spoke from a place of love and concern. But deep in her heart, she already knew it was too late to be careful. Her feelings for Caleb were developing rapidly, taking on a shape and strength of their own. When she returned to Caleb's room around midnight, she found him awake looking out the window at the illuminated city. Thor was sleeping soundly beside the stretcher, finally allowing himself to rest completely. The animal had fulfilled its mission, and now trusted that the humans around would take care of its charge. "Can't sleep?" Louisa asked softly. Caleb turned, smiling when he saw her. "I was thinking about everything that's happened, about Thor, about you. It's strange how moments of crisis can completely change your perspective on life." "How so?" Caleb gestured for her to come closer. Louisa pulled up a chair and sat beside the stretcher. "Before all this," he continued, "my life was completely predictable. I'd wake up early, work late, close deals, accumulate business achievements. I had everything money could buy, but there was an emptiness I didn't even notice. I thought I was happy because I was successful. And now? Now I realize I was just existing, not truly living. It took being on the brink of an extreme situation to understand what really matters. Loyalty, like Thor's. Compassion, like yours. Genuine human connections. Those are the things that give life meaning, not corporate achievements or numbers in bank accounts." Louisa felt tears form in her eyes. Caleb's words echoed feelings she herself had experienced after losing her mother. The way tragedies and hardships could recalibrate priorities and reveal what truly mattered. "You're special, Louisa," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the moment I woke up and saw your face, I felt something I couldn't explain, a connection, a sense that you understood my pain in a way that goes beyond professional. And the more we talk, the more certain I am of it." Louisa held his hand, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing. "I feel it too, I shouldn't, considering the circumstances. But I do. It's like we've known each other for much longer than just 2 days." They were silent for a moment, their hands intertwined, their eyes locked on each other. There was a mutual understanding, an acceptance that something was developing between them, something that defied logic and convention. "When all this is over," Caleb said softly, "when I'm recovered and the investigation is complete, I'd like to keep seeing you. If you want to, of course." "I'd like that very much," Louisa replied, smiling through her tears. "Very much." The moment was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Henry, who entered the room with a serious expression. "The teams investigated the coordinates found on Thor's collar," he announced. "They found the place where Caleb was being held, and there's important evidence there." Caleb sat up straighter on the stretcher, his attention completely focused. "What did they find?" "An abandoned warehouse exactly as you described. Clear signs of recent occupation, ropes, discarded syringes, even some documents that were left behind. The investigators are analyzing everything now, but there are already some promising leads about who might be behind this." "Who?" Caleb's voice was tense. Henry hesitated. "They're not absolutely sure yet, but there are indications it might be related to one of your companies, someone from the inside, who had access to information about your movements and habits." The revelation landed like a bombshell. The possibility that the betrayal came from within, from someone Caleb trusted professionally, was devastating. Louisa saw the pain settle in his eyes, the feeling of betrayal cutting deeper than any physical wound. "I'll speak with the investigators in the morning," Caleb said, his voice firm despite the evident pain. "I'll provide all the information I have about my team, my partners, anyone who could have had privileged access." Henry nodded and left, leaving Caleb and Louisa alone again. Thor had woken up during the conversation and was now watching Caleb attentively, as if sensing his human's emotional turmoil. Louisa didn't know what to say. Words of comfort seemed inadequate in the face of the magnitude of the potential betrayal. So she simply held Caleb's hand, offering her silent presence and unconditional support. They stayed like that for a long time as the night wore on over Manchester. Two individuals connected by extraordinary circumstances, discovering unexpected feelings in the midst of a crisis that was still far from resolved. And beside them, Thor remained vigilant, the silent hero whose unquestionable loyalty had started a journey that would change all of their lives forever. The morning of the third day after the rescue dawned grey over Manchester. Heavy clouds announced imminent rain, and the humid air seeped through the windows of the Royal Albion Hospital. Louisa had spent the previous night in a state of constant alert, her thoughts alternating between professional concern for Caleb and personal feelings that grew with each passing hour. She knew she was crossing dangerous lines, but she seemed unable to retreat. When she arrived at Caleb's room that morning, she found an unexpected scene. Besides Thor, who remained on his usual protective watch, there were three strangers, two women and a man, all impeccably dressed, with the air of professionals accustomed to corporate environments. Caleb was sitting on the stretcher, visibly uncomfortable with their presence. "Louisa," Caleb approached her immediately upon seeing her, with visible relief in his voice. "These are members of my executive team. They came as soon as they heard I was here." The older woman, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a flawless grey suit, extended her hand to Louisa. "Sandra Travers, Chief Financial Officer of Ashworth Enterprises. We are very grateful for the care you've given Caleb." Louisa shook her hand, immediately feeling a coldness that went beyond the formal grip. There was something calculating in Sandra's eyes that made her uncomfortable. The second woman, younger and with a less controlled expression, introduced herself as Beatrice Carter, Caleb's executive assistant. The man, tall and broad-shouldered, was Roderick Myers, the director of operations. The surname immediately caught Louisa's attention. Myers. Was it a coincidence, or was there some connection to Daniel Myers, the former partner Caleb had mentioned? "We were just discussing urgent company matters," Sandra said, turning back to Caleb. "With your prolonged absence, several critical decisions have been left pending. We need your authorization to proceed with some investments that cannot wait." Caleb frowned. "Sandra, I've just come out of an extremely difficult situation. I've barely processed what happened. I'm in no condition to make important business decisions right now." "But these are decisions that affect millions in investments," she insisted, "and we have tight deadlines. If we don't act quickly, we could lose crucial opportunities." Louisa watched the interaction with growing attention. Something was wrong with this scene. Sandra's urgency seemed excessive, considering Caleb had been found only 2 days after a traumatic kidnapping. Any reasonable person would understand he needed time to recover before returning to business. "I think Mr. Ashworth has made it clear he's not ready for this right now," Louisa intervened, surprising herself with her own boldness. "He is still under intensive medical care." Sandra turned to her with a cold smile. "With all due respect, nurse, but corporate matters are beyond your scope of work. We are here to help Caleb keep everything running." Louisa was about to reply when Caleb raised his hand. "Sandra is right about one thing. Business can't stop completely, but she's also wrong to press the issue at this moment. I will review the documents when I feel able. For now, the three of you have the authority to make basic operational decisions. Anything involving significant investments will have to wait." Sandra opened her mouth to protest, but Roderick touched her arm. "We understand, Caleb. We'll wait until you're better. But there's another matter we need to discuss. The police were at our offices yesterday, asking questions about all the employees. Some are worried." "It's standard investigative," Procedure, Caleb explained. They need to check all possibilities. I ask that everyone cooperate fully. Beatrice, who had remained quiet until then, stepped forward. Caleb, there are rumors circulating. People are speculating that someone from inside might be involved. It's creating a terrible climate of mistrust. Caleb sighed deeply. I know, Beatrice, and I'm sorry you all have to go through this. But we need to find out the truth. If there is a traitor within the company, they need to be identified. After a few more minutes of tense conversation, the three executives finally left. Sandra shot Louisa one last look before leaving, a look that made it clear she had not appreciated the nurse's interference. When they were alone again, Caleb let himself fall back against the pillows, visibly exhausted. Sorry about that. I should have asked them not to come yet. Louisa approached, checking his vital signs, which had elevated during the visit. That woman, Sandra, how long has she worked with you? 5 years. She's extremely competent in finance, but also very ambitious. Sometimes I think she cares more about the numbers than the people. And Roderick, is he related to Daniel Myers? Caleb opened his eyes, surprised by her perception. He's a distant cousin of Daniel's. When I hired Roderick 3 years ago, he made it very clear that he hadn't had contact with Daniel for years and that he completely disapproved of what his cousin had done. He has always been loyal and efficient. I trust him. But now you're questioning who you can trust, Louisa observed gently. Exactly. It's a horrible feeling, doubting people I've worked with for years. But someone revealed information about my location and habits to the kidnappers. It had to be someone close. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of investigators Robert and Helena. They brought important news, and their serious expressions indicated it wasn't necessarily good. Mr. Ashworth, Robert began, we've analyzed the documents found at the warehouse where you were held. There are financial records, notes on your daily movements, and even photographs of you in various locations. This confirms the kidnapping was meticulously planned by someone with access to detailed information about your life. Caleb turned pale. Have you identified who? Helena stepped forward. We're closing in. Forensic analysis of the syringes found traces of DNA that don't match yours. We're running it against the database, but we'll also need samples from people close to you for exclusion. You're asking to collect DNA from my team? Caleb's voice was tense. It's necessary, Robert confirmed. We need to eliminate possibilities. Furthermore, we found something interesting. Phone records indicate there were several calls between the kidnapping location and a number registered to a subsidiary of your corporation. Which subsidiary? Helena consulted her notes. Myers Investments, registered 6 months ago. The silence that followed was thick. Louisa saw the color drain from Caleb's face. She took his hand instinctively, offering support. That doesn't make sense, Caleb murmured. Myers Investments was dissolved years ago after Daniel left. How could it have been registered again? That's one of the questions we need to answer, said Robert. Someone reactivated the company using the old name. It could have been an attempt to hide their tracks or to send you a specific message. Caleb closed his eyes, processing the information. Do you think Daniel is alive and back in the UK? We can't confirm that yet, Helena replied, but we're investigating that possibility. We have records of Daniel Myers leaving the country 8 years ago, but no reliable confirmation of his current whereabouts. After the investigators left, Caleb remained silent for a long time. Louisa respected his space, organizing medication and checking equipment, but staying close by in case he needed her. Finally, Caleb spoke. Daniel was my best friend. We grew up together, dreamed together, built everything together. When I discovered his betrayal, it was like losing a brother. The pain of deception was worse than any financial loss. People change, Louisa said softly. Sometimes ambition and resentment can turn even the best people into something unrecognizable. I destroyed him, Caleb continued, his voice heavy with guilt. I know he stole from the company, that he did wrong, but the way I handled it, the public exposure, the prolonged legal process, it all completely broke him. I saw it in his eyes on the last day of the trial. He was no longer the Daniel I knew. He was someone consumed by hatred. You did what you had to do to protect your company and your other employees. But was there another way? Could I have handled it more privately, less destructively? These questions have haunted me for years. Louisa sat beside the stretcher, holding his hand firmly. You can't change the past. You can only learn from it and do better in the future. And if Daniel really is behind this, then the responsibility for his actions is his own, not yours. Louisa's words brought a small comfort to Caleb. He squeezed her hand, drawing strength from the connection they had established. Thor, sensing his human's anguish, came closer and rested his head on the stretcher, looking at Caleb with understanding eyes. "What would I do without you two?" Caleb murmured, stroking Thor with his free hand while holding Louisa's with the other. The rest of the day passed at a calmer pace. Caleb was discharged from the emergency department and transferred to a private room with better accommodations. Thor was officially allowed to stay with him, recognizing the vital therapeutic role the animal played in his recovery. Louisa adjusted her schedule to continue being the primary nurse responsible for his care, a decision that sparked some comments among the staff, but which Henry supported, acknowledging the importance of continuity in treatment. At night, as the hospital quieted, Louisa entered Caleb's new room carrying hot tea. He was sitting in an armchair by the window, looking out at the city lights. Thor was asleep at his feet, finally recovered from his paw injuries and extreme exhaustion. "Brought you something to help you relax," she said, offering the cup. Caleb accepted with a grateful smile. "You always know what I need. It's like you can read my mind." "It's not mind reading, it's just paying attention. I've learned to notice little signs over the years." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, enjoying each other's company. Then Caleb spoke, his voice low but firm. "Louisa, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been feeling since I woke up that first day and saw you there caring for me, calming Thor." She felt her heart race. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you. I know it's too fast, that the circumstances are unusual, that our worlds are completely different. But I can't deny what I feel. You've reminded me of what's truly important in life. Kindness, compassion, genuine connection, things I had forgotten in the rush of the corporate world." Louisa felt tears fill her eyes. "I'm feeling it too. I try to tell myself it's just the intensity of the situation, that it will pass, when everything goes back to normal, but deep down I know it's more than that." Caleb stood up from the armchair and came to her. He gently took her face in his hands. "Then don't fight it. Let's see where this takes us. No pressure, no unrealistic expectations. Just two human beings exploring a connection that feels too special to ignore." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. But Louisa didn't pull back. Their lips met in a soft kiss, filled with promise and emotion. It was a moment of shared vulnerability, two hearts, opening up despite the risks. When they parted, they were both smiling through their tears. Thor had woken up and was watching them with what seemed like canine approval, his tail wagging gently. "I think we have his blessing," Caleb said with a laugh. "Thor was always an excellent judge of character," Louisa replied. The intimate moment was abruptly interrupted by Henry's urgent arrival. His expression was grave. "Caleb, Louisa, you need to see this now." He turned on the room's television, tuning it to a news channel. A reporter was doing a live broadcast from outside a commercial building in Manchester's city centre. The flashing lights of police cars illuminated the background. "Breaking news in the case of businessman Caleb Ashworth," the reporter said. "Police have just made an arrest in connection with the kidnapping. Daniel Myers, Ashworth's former business partner, was taken into custody about an hour ago in a city centre apartment. Police sources confirm he has been in the UK for months, using false documents and planning the kidnapping in detail." Caleb sank heavily into the armchair, his face pale with shock. "Daniel, it really was him." The report continued, showing archive footage of Daniel Myers from years ago, alongside recent photos of him being led away by police. The man had changed drastically. The face that was once jovial and full of life was now thin, marked by lines of bitterness and years of accumulated resentment. "But there's a surprising twist," the reporter continued. "Daniel Myers claims he did not act alone and was hired by someone else from within Ashworth's company. He refuses to reveal the name until his lawyer is present, but promises there will be more shocking revelations in the coming hours. The news landed like a bombshell. If Daniel was telling the truth, it meant there was another conspirator, someone still inside Caleb's company, someone who remained free and potentially dangerous. Caleb's phone, which had been recovered and charged, began to ring incessantly. It was members of his team, friends, business partners, all wanting to know what was happening. He ignored most of the calls, still processing the information that his old friend had not only betrayed him again, but had been the instrument of someone else. Helena called the hospital room directly minutes later. Caleb put the phone on speaker so Louisa could hear. "Mr. Ashworth," the investigator said. "Daniel. Myers is in custody and is beginning to cooperate. He confirms he was paid to plan and execute your kidnapping. The amount involved was significant, over £500,000. "Who hired him?" Caleb demanded. "He's negotiating a deal before revealing that. But he's given us some clues. The person who hired him is someone you see regularly, someone in a position of trust within your organization. And the motive wasn't simply financial. It was something more personal and complex." Caleb hung up the phone, feeling as if the floor was disappearing beneath his feet. Someone he saw regularly. Someone he trusted. The possibilities swirled in his mind. Sandra, with her cold ambition. Roderick, with his family ties to Daniel. Beatrice, always efficient but perhaps hiding resentments. Or was it someone completely unexpected? Louisa sat beside him, putting an arm around his shoulders. "We'll find out the truth. And when we do, you'll face it with the same strength you showed in surviving the kidnapping." But there was fear in Caleb's eyes, a fear that went beyond physical concern. It was the fear of discovering he had been betrayed by someone even closer, someone whose betrayal would be even more painful than Daniel's. Thor stood up and placed his head in Caleb's lap, as he always did when he sensed his human needed comfort. The animal had saved Caleb physically, but now it was Louisa who needed to save him emotionally, to help him navigate the storm of revelations and betrayals that were still to come. The night progressed with little sleep for any of them. Caleb mentally reviewed every recent interaction with his close employees, searching for signs he might have missed. Louisa remained by his side, offering silent, comforting presence, when dawn finally broke, bringing the fourth day. Since the rescue, there was a sense that they were on the verge of crucial revelations. Daniel was in custody and would start talking. The true conspirator would soon be exposed, and Caleb would have to face not only the reality of who had betrayed him, but also make difficult decisions about how to proceed. As the city awoke to another day inside the hospital room, three beings lived in a moment, suspended in time. A man confronting deep betrayals and discovering unexpected love. A woman opening her heart despite the risks, and a loyal dog who had started it, all with an extraordinary act of courage that had changed the course of all their lives. The dawn of the fourth day brought with it a storm that had been brewing for hours. The rain began to fall heavily on Manchester, washing the streets and the windows of the Royal Albion Hospital. Caleb was standing by the room's window, watching the drops run down the glass, when Louisa entered with fresh coffee. She'd only managed 2 hours of restless sleep in one of the hospital's break rooms, refusing to go home while she felt Caleb needed her. "You didn't sleep at all," she observed, approaching and offering the cup. "I couldn't. I kept thinking about who could have done this, about every recent conversation, every meeting, every look, trying to find signs I should have noticed." Thor rose from his position beside the bed and walked over to them, leaning against Caleb's leg. The animal also seemed restless, as if sensing the tension in the air. "Helena called an hour ago," Louisa said carefully. "Daniel Myers has agreed to reveal the name this morning. She's on her way to talk to you in person." Caleb nodded, sipping the coffee, slowly. "I don't know if I'm ready to know the truth. You're stronger than you think. Thor proved that by choosing you, and I've seen it every day since you arrived here." Before Caleb could reply, there was a knock on the door. It was Henry, accompanied by Robert and Helena. The investigators' serious expressions made it clear they brought significant news. "Mr. Ashworth," Helena began, entering the room and closing the door behind her. "Daniel Myers provided detailed information this morning. The person who hired him paid £500,000, divided into several transfers over 3 months. The goal was not just kidnapping, but also to cause instability in your companies. Who was it? Caleb's voice was tense, almost hoarse. Robert stepped forward. Before we reveal that, you need to understand the context. This person had complex motives, mixing personal and professional issues. There was resentment built up over years, but masked by a facade of loyalty. Helena took a deep breath. It was Sandra Travers, your chief financial officer. The silence that fell was as thick as the rain outside. Louisa saw every expression pass across Caleb's face in a matter of seconds. Shock, disbelief, pain, and finally a bitter understanding. Sandra, he whispered. But why? I gave her a position of trust, a generous salary, recognition. What did I do to deserve this? Robert opened a folder containing printed documents. We investigated her background after Daniel's revelation. We discovered that Sandra had a prior connection to Daniel Myers. They were romantic partners 10 years ago, before you knew her. When you exposed and prosecuted Daniel, destroying his reputation and career, Sandra saw it as a personal betrayal as well. But she never mentioned knowing Daniel, Caleb said, his voice breaking. She worked with me for 5 years and never said a word. Exactly, Helena confirmed. It was deliberate. She approached you intentionally, building trust over the years, waiting for the right moment to act. Her resentment grew when you refused to promote her to executive vice president last year. That was the trigger that finally made her act. Louisa sat beside Caleb, holding his hand. The pain on his face was palpable, a mix of betrayal and self-recrimination she recognized well. There's more, Robert continued. Sandra planned to cause enough chaos in your companies during your kidnapping to devalue the stocks. She had made secret arrangements to buy large quantities of these stocks at low prices through shell companies. The plan was to profit millions from your downfall. The calculated cruelty of the plan left everyone in the room silent. It wasn't just revenge. It was a meticulous combination of personal resentment and financial greed. Where is she now? Caleb finally asked. She was arrested 2 hours ago, Helena informed him. We are collecting all the evidence. With Daniel's testimony, the financial records, and the communications we've found, we have a solid case against her. Caleb stood up abruptly and walked to the window, resting his forehead on the cold glass. Louisa respected his moment, knowing he needed to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Thor approached too, positioning himself protectively beside his human. 5 years, Caleb murmured. 5 years pretending loyalty, while planning to destroy me. How did I not see it? People like Sandra are masters of manipulation, Henry said gently. They build perfect facades. You couldn't have known. But I should have been suspicious. I should have seen the signs. Louisa approached, gently touching his shoulder. The only thing you did was trust people. That's not a flaw. It's a quality. The fault was hers, not yours. Caleb turned, tears streaming freely down his face. She was there every day, meetings, business dinners, conferences. She smiled at me, advised me, pretended to care. And it was all a lie. All of it. Not everything in your life was a lie, Louisa said firmly. Thor is real, your recovery is real, and what we're building together is real. Don't let Sandra's darkness extinguish the true lights that exist. Louisa's words penetrated through Caleb's pain. He looked at her, then at Thor, and something in his face began to change. The pain was still there, but now mixed with determination and gratitude. You're right, he said, wiping away his tears. Sandra tried to destroy me, but she failed. Thor saved me. You all saved me. And I will use this experience to become stronger, wiser. The investigators continued to provide details about the investigation, explaining that Sandra and Daniel would face multiple charges, including kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy. The case would be public and would likely attract significant media attention, but at least the truth was coming out. There's one thing we still don't fully understand, Helena said before leaving. The coordinates on Thor's collar. Daniel swears he didn't put them there, and Sandra denies it too. Someone else knew where you were and tried to help. Who could it have been? We're still investigating, but whoever it was may have saved your life by providing that extra clue. After the authorities and Henry left, Caleb and Louisa were alone again. The storm outside continued unabated, but inside the room, a strange calm began to settle. It was as if, after days of uncertainty and painful revelations, there was finally room to breathe. Caleb sat in the armchair, pulling Louisa to sit on his lap. She hesitated for only a second before settling in, resting her head on his shoulder. Thor lay at their feet, watching with calm eyes. "When all this started," Caleb said softly, "I was a different person, focused only on business, on achievements, on accumulating more success. I didn't realize what I was missing. Genuine relationships, simple moments, the ability to trust without calculating risks. And now? Now I see clearly. Thor showed me what true loyalty is. You showed me what real connection is. This terrible experience has given me an unexpected gift, a chance to rebuild my life with the right priorities." Louisa lifted her head to look at him. "And what are those priorities?" "People, not things. Love, not power. Moments, not achievements. And especially you. I want to build something real with you, Louisa. Something that goes beyond this extraordinary situation. I want that too, but you need to understand that my life is simple. I don't have mansions or luxury cars. I work shifts, care for patients, live in a small flat." Caleb smiled, gently touching her face. "And you think that matters to me? After everything I've been through, after seeing how wealth and power can corrupt and bring betrayal, do you really think I care about those things? What you have is so much more valuable. Authenticity, compassion, a genuine soul. That's what I want in my life." Tears returned to Louisa's eyes, but now they were tears of happiness. They kissed again, a deeper and more meaningful kiss than the first, sealing a commitment they both felt but were finally vocalizing. The rest of the day passed in a lighter atmosphere. The news of Sandra Travers's arrest dominated the headlines, but Caleb chose not to watch. He knew there would be time to deal with the corporate and legal consequences. At that moment, his priority was recovery and the people who truly mattered. Beatrice called, crying, apologizing for not having noticed Sandra's plans. Roderick called, offering his resignation, feeling responsible for not having protected Caleb better. He refused to accept blame from either of them, explaining that no one but the direct conspirators was responsible for what had happened. In the evening, when the storm finally passed and a clear sky revealed bright stars over Manchester, Henry came to do a final assessment. "Caleb," he said with a smile, "your vital signs are excellent. Your physical recovery has been remarkable. I think you're ready for discharge tomorrow." The news should have been cause for celebration, but Louisa felt a tightness in her chest. Discharge meant Caleb would return to his normal life, to his business responsibilities, to a world so different from hers. Would they be able to maintain what they had built in these intense days? Caleb noticed her hesitation. "I may be discharged, but I'm not going far. I have plans." "What plans?" Henry asked curiously. "First, I'm going to step back temporarily from the day-to-day operations of the companies. Roderick and Beatrice can manage everything for a few months while I recover fully, and we restructure after Sandra's betrayal. Second, I'm going to start a new philanthropic project focused on training and adopting retired rescue dogs in honor of Thor. And third, I'm going to spend all the free time I have getting to know an extraordinary nurse who saved much more than just my physical health." Louisa felt her heart burst with joy. Henry smiled, recognizing the obvious connection between his two favorite patients. That night, Louisa had to return to her regular duties with other patients. When she returned to Caleb's room in the early hours of the next morning, she found a scene that made her stop at the doorway. Caleb was sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers and documents. Thor was lying beside him, and there was a peace about them both that hadn't existed in the previous days. "What are you doing?" she asked, approaching. Caleb looked up, a new light in his eyes. "I'm reorganizing my life. listing what really matters, what needs to change, what I want to build from now on. And guess who's at the top of the list? Louisa sat beside him on the floor, looking at the papers scribbled with his handwriting. There were plans for the rescue dog project, ideas for a foundation to support victims of traumatic situations, and an entire section dedicated to balancing personal and professional life. "You're really doing it," she said, amazed. "You're changing everything." "I got a second chance at life, Louisa. I'm not going to waste it by repeating the same mistakes. I want to wake up every day knowing my actions matter, that I'm making a real difference in people's lives. And I want to wake up next to someone who constantly reminds me of those values." On the morning of the 5th day, as the discharge process officially began, a surprise awaited. Helena appeared in the room with a mysterious smile. "We found out who put the coordinates on Thor's collar," she announced. "Who?" Caleb and Louisa asked simultaneously. "Beatrice, your executive assistant. She discovered Sandra's plans by accident, overhearing a phone conversation. She was terrified and didn't know who to trust in the company. So she decided to help anonymously. She followed clues, located the warehouse where you were being held, and put the coordinates on Thor's collar when she saw him coming out of the woods. She knew Thor was taking you to the hospital and wanted to ensure the authorities could find evidence." Caleb was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "Beatrice saved me too. She took enormous risks." "She wants to talk to you when you're ready," Helena said. "She feels terribly guilty for not acting more directly. Tell her I want to see her today, and that there's nothing for her to feel guilty about. She was brave when many would have chosen silence." When Beatrice arrived 2 hours later, she was visibly nervous. "Caleb," she began, tears already streaming. "I should have done more. I should have warned you directly." Caleb stood up and, to everyone's surprise, hugged his assistant. "You did exactly what you could under the circumstances. You acted with courage and intelligence. You gave me the clues that not only saved my life but also led to the capture of those responsible. I am eternally grateful." The hug lasted for several seconds, a moment of mutual recognition and forgiveness. When they separated, Beatrice was smiling through her tears. "I will work twice as hard to rebuild your trust." "You never lost my trust," Caleb replied. "And in fact, I want to promote you. Sandra left an important vacancy. Would you like to take over as the new chief financial officer?" Beatrice was speechless, her gaze shifting between Caleb and Louisa. I don't know what to say. It's a huge honor." "Say you accept. I need loyal and courageous people in key positions. You've proven to be both." After Beatrice left, the final preparations for discharge began. Marina came to do one last check on Thor, declaring him fully recovered and ready to go home. The animal seemed eager to leave the hospital, but never strayed far from Caleb. When it was finally time to leave late that afternoon, a small crowd had gathered to say goodbye. Nurses, doctors, and other hospital staff wanted to bid farewell to the canine hero who had captured everyone's heart. Thor accepted the affection and praise with characteristic dignity, but his eyes remained focused on Caleb. Louisa walked them to the hospital exit. Caleb had insisted she take time off to be with him on his first day out. They walked together through the corridors that had been the scene of so much emotional intensity over the past few days. Outside, the afternoon sun shone brightly, as if celebrating a new beginning. Caleb took a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling more alive than he had in years. Thor stood by his side, looking up at the sky with what seemed like canine satisfaction. A driver was waiting with a discreet car, very different from the luxury vehicles Caleb normally used. This was another change he had decided to make: less ostentation, more simplicity. "Want to come with me?" Caleb asked Louisa. "I want to show you my home. Introduce Thor to his new life project, and maybe cook something simple for us. I learned a few recipes during my time in isolation, believe it or not." Louisa smiled, accepting the invitation. She got into the car beside him, with Thor settled comfortably in the back seat. As they drove away from the hospital, she looked out the window, reflecting on how her life had completely changed in just 5 days. Caleb's house was a surprise. Though large and well located, It lacked the ostentation Louisa had expected. It was a welcoming space with well-tended gardens and a wide porch, overlooking a green area. Thor immediately ran to his favorite spot, a comfortable bed near the fireplace. "Welcome to my real life," Caleb said, guiding Louisa through the house. "I know it looks impressive, but I've always tried to maintain a balance. This is my refuge, my place of peace away from the corporate chaos." "It's beautiful," Louisa replied sincerely, "and it feels like you. Comfortable, but with substance." They spent the afternoon cooking together, a surprisingly pleasant and intimate activity. Caleb proved to be a competent cook, and together they prepared a simple but delicious dinner. Thor stayed nearby, occasionally receiving bits of food that both of them pretended not to be giving him. During dinner, sitting on the porch as the sun set over Manchester, Caleb took Louisa's hand across the table. "I want you to know that this isn't a fairy tale where everything is perfect from now on. I'm going to have difficult moments processing the betrayal. I'll have nightmares about the kidnapping. I'll make mistakes as I try to rebuild my life." "I know," Louisa replied, "and I'll be here through all of it. I don't expect perfection, I just expect honesty and real effort, and I know you're capable of both." "There's something else I need to tell you," Caleb continued. "I've decided to sell stakes in several of my companies. I'm going to drastically reduce my direct involvement in the businesses. I want time to live, to love, to make a difference in more direct and personal ways." "And what will you do?" "The Rescue Dog Project is just the beginning. I want to establish a foundation that helps people who have been through traumas similar to mine. I want to invest in real social causes, not just make corporate donations for public image. And most importantly, I want time to build a life with you." Tears streamed down Louisa's face once more. "How do you manage to say exactly what my heart needs to hear?" "Because my heart is saying the same things," Caleb replied, standing up and pulling her into his arms. They held each other on the porch, watching the city lights turn on one by one. Thor came to join them, pressing his body against their legs, completing the circle of connection that had begun on that misty morning 5 days ago. In the weeks that followed, life began to find a new rhythm. Caleb kept his promise, drastically reducing his corporate involvement and focusing on his new projects. The Thor Foundation, as he decided to name his new philanthropic initiative, began to take shape, helping both retired rescue dogs and people who had been through traumatic experiences. Louisa continued working at the hospital, but now with a healthier balance between her professional and personal life. She and Caleb saw each other regularly, building a solid relationship based on mutual respect, deep understanding, and genuine love. Thor became a local celebrity, his story of loyalty and courage inspiring people across the country. But to him, none of that mattered. What mattered was being by his human side, lying at Caleb's feet as he worked on his new projects, or walking beside him and Louisa during their strolls through Manchester's parks. The trial of Sandra Travers and Daniel Myers attracted significant media attention. Both were sentenced to long prison terms, with justice finally being served. Caleb testified when necessary, but refused to feed the media circus. He had gone through the experience, learned his lessons, and was now focused on moving forward. 6 months after the rescue, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Caleb organized a special event. It was the official launch of the Thor Foundation, with local press coverage and the presence of officials interested in supporting the cause. But the most significant moment came when he stepped onto the makeshift stage in the garden of a property that had been adapted as the foundation's center. Thor was by his side, as always. Louisa was in the front row, smiling with pride, and Caleb began to speak, his voice firm but emotional. "6 months ago, I went through the most terrifying experience of my life. I was betrayed, kidnapped, and held captive. It should have been a tragic end, but thanks to the extraordinary loyalty of an exceptional animal, the dedicated care of incredible healthcare professionals, and the unexpected love of an extraordinary person, it became a new beginning." He paused, looking at Thor. "This animal didn't just save my physical life. He taught me the true meaning of loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. Qualities that many of us humans lose along the path of modern life." Then his gaze met Louisa's. And an extraordinary nurse taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, that asking for help is not failure, and that the deepest human connections often arise in the most unlikely moments. The audience listened in respectful silence, many visibly moved. This foundation was born from that experience. Our goal is threefold: to help retired search and rescue dogs find loving homes, to support people who have gone through traumas similar to mine, and to promote the values of loyalty, courage, and compassion that seem to be lacking in the modern corporate world. When the speech ended, the audience applauded warmly, but Caleb barely registered it. His eyes were fixed on Louisa, who was making her way to the stage. He had planned to do this more privately, but in that moment it felt exactly right. "Louisa Fletcher," he said, kneeling before her as the audience gasped in surprise. "Over the past 6 months, you have transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You showed me what truly matters. You gave me the courage to change, to grow, to become the person I was always meant to be." He took a small box from his pocket. "I know this is fast. I know our worlds are different. But I also know with absolute certainty that I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, honoring you, and making you happy. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed freely down Louisa's face. She looked at the man kneeling before her, remembering that first misty morning when he had arrived at the hospital, unconscious on Thor's back. She remembered every conversation, every moment of shared vulnerability, every step of the journey that had brought them here. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "1,000 times. Yes." The audience erupted in applause and cheers. Caleb placed the ring on her finger and pulled her into a passionate kiss. Thor barked loudly, clearly approving of the decision, and the joy that spread through everyone present was palpable. That night, after all the guests had left and the property returned to silence, Caleb, Louisa, and Thor sat together on the porch. The stars shone brightly in the clear Manchester sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of garden flowers. "You know," Louisa said, resting her head on Caleb's shoulder, 6 months ago, I woke up thinking it would be just another normal day at work. I never imagined a German Shepherd would completely change the course of my life. And I never imagined that being rescued by my own dog would be the best gift I would ever receive," Caleb replied, stroking Thor with his free hand, "or that in the darkest moment of my life I would find the brightest light." Thor yawned deeply, content in his position between the two humans he loved. For him, everything was exactly as it should be. His mission was complete. He had saved his human, guided him to the right person, and now he could rest, knowing they would both be safe and happy. The months turned into years. Caleb and Louisa married in an intimate ceremony, with Thor officially serving as the canine best man. The Thor Foundation grew and prospered, helping hundreds of dogs and people. Caleb's companies continued to be successful, but now under the management of trustworthy people who shared his renewed values. Beatrice became one of the most respected executives in her field, proving that loyalty and competence could coexist in the business world. Roderick remained as director of operations, his honesty and dedication finally recognized and valued. And Thor, the silent hero who had started it all, lived out his remaining years surrounded by love, comfort, and the satisfaction of knowing he had fulfilled the most important purpose of his life, to protect and save the one he loved. Years later, when Thor finally crossed the Rainbow Bridge, Caleb and Louisa cried as they had never cried before. But through the tears there was profound gratitude, gratitude for having had the privilege of knowing and loving such an extraordinary creature, gratitude for the journey he had started, gratitude for the life they had built together because of him. In his honor, they installed a bronze statue of Thor at the entrance to the foundation. The plaque beneath it read simply, "In memory of Thor, who taught us the true meaning of loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. His legacy lives on in every life we save, in every connection we foster, in every heart we touch." And so, the story of a kidnapping that should have ended in tragedy transformed into a tale of hope, renewal, and love, a story about how the darkest moments can lead to the greatest transformations. A story about loyalty that transcends species. And most of all, a story about how sometimes being saved physically is just the beginning of being saved in every way possible. Caleb found not only physical freedom on that misty morning when Thor carried him to the hospital, but also emotional and spiritual freedom. Louisa found the love she had stopped looking for after her mother's passing, and Thor fulfilled the noblest purpose any being can aspire to save and transform lives through unconditional love and selfless sacrifice.